You know, our current policy in Spokane of conducting police sweeps of homeless really fits into a very long historical narrative throughout the country of using the police power of the state to try to rid us of undesirables, whoever they might be, you know, whether it was day laborers or migrant workers, the poor, minorities, whether they be racial or sexual or otherwise. We have a long history of trying to solve that problem, as we see, with force, with the criminal sanctions, with police, with jail and judges, and punishment. And our history is very clear that it just doesn't work to meet the goals that we might have, and it's inhumane, and never goes to the root of the problem. It's just, maybe it's the easiest fix that one can reach for. We have these police already here and they can use force and we can get an immediate, by morning this area will be clear, but it doesn't do anything for the long run. It doesn't solve the root causes. If you've removed someone from the street for a day, where do they go tomorrow? And then it just shows a lack of, what's the word I'm looking for, empathy, and I think the problem solving that we need to say, if we really want to solve this problem for our sake, if not for the other person's sake who we're frustrated with, we need to figure out what the root cause is. It's really unfortunate. I think that there's so many better tools available. They are usually less expensive, more humane, and more long-term. The thing is, we need to have all of us invested in that. This is the other tools that we might need, like funding, like places to go, community support programs, treatment, housing, require political will, community will, financial commitment, all the things that are a little bit harder to do and take more time and attention. Whereas if you give it to the police, that's their problem. They'll take care of it. Don't think about it anymore, out of sight, out of mind. And I think that's where the main disconnect is. Yeah, I think the Martin versus Boise decision illustrates really well the limited power of the courts and what their power actually is. It was considered a major blow for homelessness rights and people who advocate for the homeless to get finally a court victory that said there's a limit on what the city can do. But it's important to remember a few things. It was rare. It got so much attention because it's not often that plaintiffs win cases like that. It was vigorously opposed. There were a number of dissents that were some of the most strongly worded dissents I've ever read in my career as a lawyer, to saying how wrong the court was to do this. And so judges aren't of one mind to do what was done in Martin v. Boise. And then it was very limited in scope within itself. It held only that it violates the 8th Amendment for the police to arrest somebody for being on the streets if there are no homeless shelter beds available. But of course that leaves a lot of other options available to the police. So when there are homeless beds available, they can still arrest people. And it only says that you can't criminalize the existence of somebody as a poor person or homeless or unhoused person. But it left open the option of police to still arrest people for conduct crimes, such as obstructing the sidewalk or other things that aren't based on their existence. And so police have been able to get around a lot of the Martin versus Boise spirit by doing that. The power of Martin v. Boise was not in what the court ordered, it's how the public responded to the court's decision. The media gave it a lot of attention, and then people gave it a lot of attention, as community members, speaking up at city council meetings, and writing into their politicians, and marching and demanding that, hey, this is a problem if we're arresting people. And you know, the decision itself made Boise change during the litigation. It changes policies to say we're not going to enforce the sit and lie law while shelters are full. And it admitted in the litigation that, you know, arrest should be the last resort. And it's prompted Boise and other cities around the country to start thinking about investing more in shelters and housing and low barriers to getting the housing. And one thing the Boise decision did was it made people realize that people were being arrested for being homeless even when the shelters were full. I think a lot of people didn't realize that we had shelters that were overfull and that people literally had no place to go. And since most community members don't like having a city where people have to camp outside, and they thought there was an easy solution that they can go to shelters, and they realized, oh wait, there's actually a situation where there's more people than we have room for. We got to start investing more in that room. And we also have to think about, hopefully, how we respond when we want someone to not be on the sidewalk. Should we respond with the police, or should we respond with a homeless outreach team that provides resources? Because I think we all just were forced to confront a problem that we had really worked hard to ignore for a long time. And a decision like that, its real main power is simply to make us, hopefully, talk and think about these problems and actually invest some resources in fixing them. I have a background in clinical psychology, education, and training. And one of the things I learned really early on from one of my mentors was this rule that everyone's behavior makes sense once you get all the information. Even things that seem inexplicable to us on the surface can be explained once you know everything that's factoring into that behavior. It could be something as dramatic as they live in a different reality because they have delusions or hallucinations. Schizophrenia, for instance. You might see someone running down the street yelling in terror with nothing behind them, which makes no sense to you, but when you learn more about that person, they may actually see a bear chasing them, and so it actually makes perfect sense for them. And when you understand that someone has trauma in their history, or an addiction, or mental illness, or poverty, or any number of factors that make sense to them when you get to know it, then you can start solving the problem. And so when you're still confused, you have to dig deeper. And that's very true with the clients I used to work with here in Spokane, and every story that I hear of someone who's unhoused, it's really, really complicated. If they've got a history of mental illness, there's only so many things they can do. The things that we think should be so obvious, take these steps, they would like to, they just simply cannot. If they've tried shelters before and have been sexually assaulted or stolen from or beaten up, they can't go back. There's a trauma response to doing that. You'd like them to get a job, but there's so many steps to getting a job that they could do if they got the job, but getting an outfit for, to look nice for the interview. How do you apply in the first place if it's only online? Where do you get childcare if you need it, or things like that? And so there's never going to be an easy one-size-fits-all solution, because every single case is different. And what needs to happen is people who will invest the time to figuring out what explains that situation and what the solution is for that situation. It's never going to be, in my experience, that the person simply needs more motivation. If they're motivated by the fact that they're cold and they're hungry and they're sleeping outside and they're not safe, and having a police officer come and make their lives worse is not the kick in the pants they needed to finally start taking action. They've had all the motivation they need. If anything, it just takes away what little bit of hope they may have had and motivation, and provides one more barrier to have to overcome on top of everything else. Now there's a citation to deal with, and a fine, and a jail sentence, and their stuff maybe got taken away, and they're even farther behind. Legally speaking, sadly, there's no law on the books or constitutional provision that it clearly says that we can't harass homeless people with our legal system. Sadly, I mean, there are lines that can't be crossed overall. You can make a lawsuit for 8th Amendment violations like in Martin. You can sue for violations of personal rights, First Amendment, Fourth Amendment, lack of probable cause. But those are all case-by-case situations. They're not going to get to the root cause of us as a society and what we want to do to solve this problem. If we want to keep using a hammer, all you can do is break stuff. You can hammer down some nails once in a while, but you're not going to be able to solve this problem with force. And it's going to be a hard but completely doable approach. We just have to make up our minds to do it. You know, I used to work as a case manager here in Spokane, and I will say that for the investment we made into me and my position, others like me, paying between $30,000 to $40,000 a year, but for the caseload of 50 to 60 people that we helped, keep housing, keep off the streets, make sure they could have access to medication and to housing and to food and hopefully get the employment, and working with each one of their unique needs was so cost effective. It cost less, it's like half of a police officer, and we got to help 50 to 60 people at a time, and every single person that we helped was money that was saved on all the other law enforcement and judicial services that would have otherwise been expended. And it's still striking to me that that was considered, that was the area that was always considered for budget cuts and couldn't be funded more because it was so expensive. And I always wanted to yell that we are saving everyone so much money and we're doing such good in the community. Why is there even a consideration of cutting funding here? One thing that's very concerning to me is the new trend towards arresting and prosecuting people who are trying to help the homeless. We've seen a number of cases where people are there just to either try to provide services and get arrested, or giving out water, or filming the interaction, just witnessing what's going on. And for some reason, the Spokane Police Department has chosen, and the prosecutor's office, have chosen to make those into criminal offenses. And one can ask the question of whether they are criminal offenses and whether there's probable cause, and those will be argued out in court. But the bigger question is why it's even going that direction in the first place. You know, our law enforcement has massive discretion about when and whether to arrest somebody. They can see a jaywalker and decide not to cite that person because they got bigger things to focus on. And they could deal with somebody who is in their way in many different ways. They could either ignore the person or ask them politely to move or whatever. Warn them that next time they would be arrested. But for some reason, there's a decision that's been made at a policy level that we're going to bring the force of the law down on people who aren't even doing anything that would normally be considered a crime because we want to make them stop doing that. It's a deterrent factor. The offenses are not so serious it'll land someone in prison, but it's enough to keep somebody from wanting to help again. And I'm just befuddled by that, and I think we as a society should ask that question. Why are we doing that? If we really want to solve this problem, why are we trying to stop the people who are there to maybe get to the root causes or help that person on the street get off the street? Why would we want to deter them from doing so? I know that we don't want to interfere with police officers and make their job harder when they're just doing what they're supposed to do, but is there some way for us to do both at the same time? And that's on us. We can't just leave it up to the courts or to lawyers to bring cases that might help those individuals, you know, beat the charges. That's not going to answer the question. It's on us, the voters of the city who elect the policymakers, to ask them, why is this policy in place? And then to demand, if we find that it's not consistent with our values, that that policy change.